The night he walked in. The house was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. It was close to midnight when Alexander Grant, one of the richest men in the city, walked through the grand hallway of his estate. His black suit was still perfect from the evening's charity gala, but his mind was restless. He had not planned to be home this early, yet something had pulled him back. The sound of his shoes echoed on the marble floor as he moved deeper inside. Most of the staff were already asleep, their quarters tucked away at the far end of the mansion. But as he passed the guest wing, a faint sound caught his attention. It was soft, almost like the hum of a lullaby. Alexander frowned. Who would be awake at this hour? And why in the guest wing? He pushed the door open slowly and his eyes froze. There on the cold wooden floor lay Grace, the young black maid he had hired only 3 months ago. She was curled on her side, one arm wrapped protectively around a tiny baby. The child was fast asleep, its little face pressed against her chest. A thin blanket covered them both, but it was not enough to hide the truth. Grace had been sleeping on the floor all night. For a moment, Alexander did not move. He just stood there, his sharp blue eyes studying the scene. In his world of private jets, luxury cars, and penthouse meetings, this image felt unreal. Why would anyone choose the floor over a bed? Why was there a baby here at all? Grace stirred, her eyelids fluttered open, and when she saw him, her body stiffened. She sat up quickly, still holding the baby close. Her dark brown eyes were wide with fear. "Sir, she began, but her voice was barely a whisper. Alexander stepped forward, his deep voice calm but laced with authority. "What is this?" he asked. "Why are you here? Like this?" Grace's mouth opened, then closed. Again, her hands trembled slightly, but she kept the baby secure. She looked down, avoiding his gaze. "It's not what it looks like," she said softly. "I can explain." Alexander's eyes narrowed. He wasn't a man who liked delays. He was used to answers, quick and clear, but something in her voice stopped him from pressing harder. Still, his patience had limits. "I'm listening," he said, crossing his arms. Grace bit her lip. She looked at the baby, then back at him. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word. Alexander tilted his head, studying her carefully. He was a man who had seen people lie for money, for power, for survival. But this didn't feel like a lie. It felt like something heavier, something she was afraid to speak. The baby stirred and let out a tiny whimper. Grace immediately rocked it gently, humming a tune Alexander didn't recognize. It was an old melody, warm and steady, and for a strange moment, he found himself listening. The sound filled the room, pushing away the cold. Finally, Grace looked up. Her eyes met his, and for the first time that night, Alexander saw not fear, but pain. "I couldn't leave him," she said. "He was out there crying. No one cared. No one would help." Alexander's jaw tightened. Her words stirred something in him, but he kept his expression unreadable. "You mean to tell me," he said slowly, "that someone left this child here?" Grace nodded. "At the service entrance. Just before the rain started," she explained. "I didn't know what to do. The guard said it wasn't their problem." She swallowed hard. "I couldn't put him in the storeroom. There was nothing for him there. So I stayed here, on the floor." Her voice was trembling now, but her grip on the child never wavered. Alexander took a step closer. He could smell the faint scent of soap and baby powder mixed with the sea. Old air of the room, the sight of her sitting there, tired, dressed in a simple uniform but protecting the baby as if it were her own, was something he didn't expect to affect him. "Why didn't you come to me?" he asked. Grace shook her head. "You wouldn't have listened," she said quietly. Her words were not sharp, not meant as an insult. They were simply honest. The statement lingered in the air. Alexander didn't reply immediately. Instead, he turned toward the bed in the room, a large, comfortable bed that was untouched, then back to the woman and the child on the floor. Something about this night was different. Something told him this was only the beginning of a story he hadn't asked for, but now couldn't walk away from. And so he said the words that would change everything. Tell me everything. Grace took a deep breath, glanced at the sleeping baby, and began. But what she was about to say would shake Alexander's world in ways he could not imagine. Her story begins. Grace sat on the edge of the bed now. Her back was straight, her hands holding the baby close as if someone might take him away at any moment. The soft glow of the bedside lamp lit her tired face. Alexander stood across the room, his tall figure casting a long shadow on the wall. He was still in his suit, still every bit the billionaire people feared in business meetings, but now his sharp eyes were fixed on her, not with anger but with a kind of cold curiosity. Start from the beginning, he said, his voice firm. Every detail. Grace's fingers brushed the baby's hair as she took a breath. I was finishing my chores, she began, her voice quiet but steady. It was raining outside, heavy rain, the kind that makes the air smell like the earth is breaking open. She paused for a second. I went to the service entrance to put away the garbage bins, and that's when I heard it. Crying. Her eyes lowered, as if she could still hear it. A baby's cry, but different, desperate, like he knew no one was coming. Alexander's jaw shifted slightly. What did you see? He asked. Grace tightened her hold on the child. There was a basket, an old, worn basket sitting right by the door, soaked from the rain, she said. And inside was him. She looked down at the baby sleeping peacefully now. He was wrapped in thin cloth. His skin was cold. His lips were trembling. Alone? Alexander asked, his voice quieter this time. Grace nodded. I called for help. The guards came, but they looked at me like it wasn't their problem. Her voice trembled. They told me to leave the basket until morning, that maybe someone would come back for him. Alexander's expression hardened. And you didn't, he said, not as a question but as a statement. No, Grace replied firmly, her voice suddenly gaining strength. I couldn't leave him there. Not in that rain, not in that cold. She told him how she had carried the baby into the guest wing, how she searched for a crib or anything soft for him to rest in. But there was nothing, so she sat on the floor, wrapping him in the only blanket she could find. She kept him against her chest, sharing her warmth until he finally stopped crying. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of the baby's soft breathing. Alexander studied her face. It wasn't just pity in her eyes. It was something deeper, something he hadn't seen in a long time, a fierce, selfless kind of care. You could have put him on the bed, Alexander said, glancing at the large, untouched mattress. Grace shook her head. No, babies can roll, she said simply. I didn't want him to fall. The floor was safer as long as I was right there. Her words surprised him. He had never thought of it that way. In his world, problems were solved with money, comfort, and luxury, but Grace had chosen safety over comfort. Even if it meant sleeping on hard wood, Alexander walked closer, his polished shoes silent on the floor. Do you know who he belongs to? He asked. Grace hesitated. No, I don't, she said, but someone left him here for a reason. Something about the way she said it caught his attention. What reason? He pressed. Grace looked down, her fingers tightening around the blanket. I think he's in danger, she whispered. People don't leave a baby like this unless they're desperate, or unless they're running from something. Alexander's eyes narrowed, running from something. The thought stuck in his mind. His life was filled with enemies in suits, competitors who would shake his hand at meetings and stab him in the back the same night. If this baby was connected to any of that, Grace's voice pulled him back. I didn't tell anyone else, she said. I was afraid. Afraid that if the wrong person knew, the baby might disappear. For a man who lived by contracts and deals, trust was rare for Alexander, yet here she was, a maid in his house, telling him something she could have hidden completely. It was either brave or foolish. He stepped back, folding his arms. You understand this puts you in a dangerous position, he said. Grace nodded without hesitation. If it's between me and him, I'll take the danger, she replied. The simplicity of her answer made him pause. People didn't usually talk to him like that. Without fear, without calculation. He found himself staring at her longer than he meant to, noticing the way her shoulders stayed squared, the way her eyes didn't look away from his. Finally, he spoke. "You'll keep him here. For now," Alexander said slowly. "But you don't leave the estate." Grace's lips parted in surprise. "Why?" she asked. "Because," Alexander replied, "until I know who he is, I'm not letting him out of my sight." His words were final. But deep down, Alexander knew this wasn't just about the baby anymore. It was about the woman holding him and the feeling that both of them had just stepped into something far bigger than they understood, the test. The next morning, sunlight pilled into the guest room. Grace sat in the armchair by the window, holding the baby close. Her eyes were heavy from the long night, but she refused to sleep. Alexander had left before dawn without saying much, but she knew he was thinking, planning, deciding something. In another part of the estate, Alexander sat at the long glass table in his private office. His assistant, Mark, stood beside him. "You want me to look into her?" Mark asked quietly. Alexander nodded. "Everything," he replied. "Where she came from, who she worked for before, and if she has any connection to this child." Mark hesitated. "You don't trust her?" Alexander's gaze stayed fixed on the city skyline beyond the window. "I trust people to be exactly what they are," he said coldly. "But I don't know what she is yet." By noon, Alexander returned to the guest wing. Grace looked up when he entered, her expression wary. "You're still here," he said, as if testing her. "You told me not to leave," she reminded him. Her voice was calm, but her grip on the baby was protective. Alexander stepped closer. "I want to see how far you'll go for him," he said. Grace frowned. "What do you mean?" He sat down across from her. "For the next week, you'll care for the baby here. No outside help," he explained. "You'll have food and supplies, but no one else will handle him. Only you." Grace blinked, surprised. "That's fine," she said after a pause. "It's what I would do anyway." Alexander studied her face for any sign of hesitation. There was none. She was steady, almost defiant. That night, the test began. The baby woke up crying with a high-pitched wail that echoed through the quiet halls. Grace moved quickly, holding him close, checking his forehead. She noticed his skin was warmer than before, too warm. Her heart sank. He was sick. The house doctor was nowhere to be found. Off attending an urgent call. He searched the cabinets for medicine but found nothing suitable for an infant. She sat on the bed, rocking the baby as his tiny fists clenched. Her mind raced. She remembered her grandmother's remedy, one that had helped many children in her old neighborhood. She went to the kitchen. The night cook stared as she prepared a small bowl of warm water with crushed herbs and honey. "You can't give that to him," the cook said nervously. "It's safe," Grace replied firmly. "I've done this before." Alexander appeared in the doorway. He had been watching from the shadows. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. Grace met his gaze without flinching. "Yes," she said. "I won't let him suffer while I wait for someone else." She dipped a small cloth in the mixture and gently let the baby suck the liquid from it. Slowly, his crying eased. His breathing became softer, his body relaxing against her. Grace let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Alexander stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the now sleeping baby. "You've done this before," he said quietly. "Yes," she admitted. "I was training to be a nurse before life got in the way." Alexander didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood there watching her hold the baby like he was the most important thing in the world. Finally, he said, "Go back to sleep. I'll have the doctor see him in the morning." But Grace didn't sleep. She stayed awake until dawn, checking the baby's breathing every hour. She didn't know that Alexander returned twice in the night. Each time he found her in the same spot, tired but alert, her arms wrapped around the child. The next morning, Mark entered Alexander's office with a folder. "I found something," Mark said. Alexander opened it and scanned the pages. Grace's history unfolded before him, her studies, her sudden dropout, her years working in smaller homes, her spotless record, and one detail that made him pause. She had once been a volunteer at an orphanage known for taking in abandoned children. Alexander closed the folder slowly. If she was acting, she was very good at it, but something told him this wasn't an act. Back in the guest wing, Grace was feeding the baby when Alexander walked in. He didn't say much, just watched for a moment. Finally, he asked, "Why didn't you become a nurse?" Grace looked at him, then back at the baby. "My mother got sick," she said softly. "I had to take care of her. When she passed, I couldn't afford to go back to school." Alexander said nothing, but inside, something shifted. For the first time, this wasn't just a test for Grace. It was a test for him too. One he wasn't sure he'd pass, the discovery. It was 2 days later, the baby's fever had gone, and his cheeks were now rosy with health. Grace felt a quiet relief as she watched him sleep in the small crib Alexander had sent to the guest room. For the first time in days, she had a moment to breathe. The late afternoon light spilled across the floor. Grace decided to wash the baby's blanket, the same thin cloth he had been wrapped in the night she found him. As she shook it out over the bed, something small and hard fell to the floor with a soft clink. She bent down and picked it up. It was a tiny gold locket, its surface worn but still beautiful. Her brow furrowed as she examined it. The front had a delicate pattern of vines and leaves, and on the back, 2 engraved letters, A.G. Grace turned the locket over in her palm, her heartbeat quickened. She tried to open it, but the clasp was stiff. Finally, with a small click, it gave way. Inside was a tiny photograph, faded with age but still clear enough to see, a young man with sharp blue eyes, eyes that looked exactly like Alexander's. Grace's mind raced. Could this be the baby's father, or someone connected to Alexander? And why would this be hidden in the baby's blanket? She heard footsteps in the hallway. Her instinct told her to hide the locket. She slipped it into her pocket just as Alexander walked in. His gaze swept the room quickly, landing on her. "Everything all right?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Grace nodded. "Yes, just cleaning." But she could feel the weight of the locket in her pocket like a secret burning against her skin. Alexander stepped closer to the crib. The baby stirred but didn't wake. Alexander adjusted the blanket with a rare gentleness. Grace watched him carefully, wondering if he noticed the resemblance between the child and the man in the photo. Later that evening, Grace sat in the corner with the baby in her arms. She kept touching the locket in her pocket. Part of her wanted to confront Alexander right away, but another part feared what might happen if she did. That fear grew stronger the next morning. Alexander's assistant, Mark, came to the guest room while she was folding laundry. His smile was polite, but his eyes held questions. "Where exactly did you find the baby that night?" he asked. Grace hesitated. "At the service entrance. In a basket," she said slowly. "And there was nothing else with him?" Mark pressed. "No, nothing," she lied, her hand instinctively going to her pocket. When Mark left, Grace's thoughts spun. If the assistant was asking questions, maybe Alexander already suspected something. She decided to open the locket again, staring at the man's face. The resemblance to Alexander was undeniable. That evening, Alexander returned earlier than usual. Grace was sitting on the bed with the baby when he entered. She had the locket in her hand. She didn't even have time to hide it this time. Alexander's eyes fell instantly on it, and his expression changed. He froze for a moment before stepping forward. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice low and sharp. Grace swallowed. "What bit?" "It was in the baby's blanket," she admitted. "I was going to tell you, but—" Alexander took the locket from her, opening it with ease. His gaze lingered on the photograph. "This belonged to my brother," he said finally, his tone quieter. Grace felt a chill run through her. "Your brother?" Alexander nodded. "He died years ago, but before that there were rumors." He paused, looking at the sleeping baby. "Rumors that he had a child, but no one ever proved it." Grace's heart pounded. "Do you think this could be—" she began, but Alexander cut her off. "I don't know," he said, "but I intend to find out." His eyes locked with hers. "I want a DNA test," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "If this boy is my nephew, everything changes." Grace looked down at the child in her arms. He was peaceful, unaware of the storm about to come. "What will happen to him if it's true?" she asked quietly. Alexander didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "He'll be part of my family. But that means I'll have to decide where you fit in that picture." The words hung in the air like a warning. Grace held the baby closer, feeling an unshakable fear in her chest. She had protected him from the cold, from hunger, from sickness, but could she protect him from the billionaire now standing before her? The truth comes out. The next few days passed like slow-moving clouds. Grace stayed in the guest room, caring for the baby, her every movement watched by the silent walls, and she suspected, by unseen eyes, Alexander came and went, his presence like a storm that never fully broke. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were sharp, direct, and heavy with meaning. On the third night, the air in the mansion felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath. A knock at the door echoed through the hall. It was late, too late for casual visitors. Grace looked up from the crib as Alexander appeared in the doorway. His expression was unreadable. In his hand, he held a large envelope sealed in red wax. She knew instantly what it was. Her chest tightened. "Is that?" she began. "Yes," Alexander said simply. "The DNA results." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. For a moment, neither of them moved. The baby stirred in the crib, letting out a soft sigh. Alexander's eyes flicked toward him before returning to Grace. "Do you want to hear it?" he asked. Grace's throat felt dry. "Yes," she whispered. Though a part of her wanted to run, Alexander broke the seal with a careful hand. The sound of tearing paper was louder than it should have been. He unfolded the document slowly, scanning the first few lines. His face gave nothing away. No smile, no frown, no flicker of emotion. Grace couldn't take it anymore. "Well?" she asked, her voice breaking. Alexander's eyes finally lifted to meet hers. "It's true," he said quietly. "He's my nephew, my brother's son." The words seemed to echo in the room. Grace glanced at the baby, now sleeping peacefully. A part of her was relieved. He had a blood connection, a family, a place in the world. But another part feared what would come next. Alexander placed the paper on the table and moved closer to the crib. His gaze softened for a brief moment as he looked at the boy. Then, in the next breath, it was gone, replaced by the sharp focus of a man making decisions. "He'll live here now," Alexander said. "He'll have everything, security, education, the best of everything." Grace's stomach turned. "And me?" she asked quietly. Alexander's gaze shifted to her, unreadable. "That's the part I haven't decided," he admitted. "You've cared for him well, better than anyone else would have. But family is complicated." Grace stood slowly, her voice firm. "He needs me," she said. "Not just because I feed him and keep him warm, but because he knows me. He sleeps when I hold him, he calms when I'm near. Take that away and you'll lose me thing you can't buy." Alexander studied her. He was a man used to people begging, bargaining, or flattering to get what they wanted, but Grace's voice carried none of that. Only truth. It made him pause. "You speak as if you have a claim to him," Alexander said. "I don't," Grace replied, "but he has a claim to me." Silence filled the room. The ticking of the wall clock grew louder. Alexander finally turned away, walking toward the door. "You'll stay for now," he said, his voice low. "But understand this. If I find even a hint that you've been hiding something else from me, you'll be gone before sunrise." He left, the door closing softly behind him. Grace stood there for a long moment, her heart still pounding. She walked over to the crib, brushing her fingers across the baby's forehead. The child stirred, his tiny hand gripping her finger. She bent down and whispered, "No matter what happens, I'm not letting go of you." Later that night, Grace couldn't sleep. She replayed Alexander's words in her head. The DNA results had given the baby a future, but had left her standing at a crossroads. One wrong step, and she could be cut out of his life completely. What she didn't know was that Alexander, in his own room across the hall, was wide awake too. He sat at his desk, the DNA paper beside him. In his hand, he held the locket, turning it over and over. His mind was already moving ahead, making plans. For the first time in years, those plans didn't just involve business or money. They involved family, and family, he knew, could be the most dangerous game of all. The morning came with a heavy gray sky. The sound of distant rain tapped softly against the tall windows of the mansion. Grace was in the guest room, rocking the baby in her arms. Her thoughts were still tangled from the night before. Alexander's words kept replaying in her head. You'll stay for no, but for now wasn't enough. She needed something certain, something that meant she wouldn't be ripped away from the child she had come to love like her own. A knock came at the door. It was not hurried but steady. She looked up to see Alexander standing there, dressed in his usual sharp suit, his expression unreadable as always. Come with me, he said, his voice low. Grace followed him through the long hallway. Her footsteps felt too loud on the polished floors. They entered his private study, a room she had never been in before. It was lined with dark wood shelves and books, the air thick with the scent of old leather and paper. The baby stirred in her arms, sensing the tension. Alexander closed the door behind them. For a moment he stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, staring out at the rain. Finally he turned. I've made my decision, he said. Grace's breath caught. She braced herself for the worst. You've cared for him well, Alexander continued. You've shown more patience and devotion than I expected, but this is more than just care. He walked closer, his gaze steady. This boy is my blood, my brother's only son. He will inherit my name, my protection, and my resources. He paused. But a name and money are not enough. He needs someone who will keep him human. Grace didn't speak. She was afraid to interrupt, afraid the wrong word could change everything. I could hire the best nannies, the most qualified caretakers, Alexander went on, but they would see him as a job, not as a child. His voice lowered slightly. You look at him like he's yours. Grace's eyes stung. She wanted to tell him how much the baby meant to her, how she had stayed up every night watching over him, how she had whispered promises into his tiny ears, but she stayed silent, letting him speak. That's why I'm offering you a new position, Alexander said. You will no longer be a maid. You will be his official caretaker. You'll have your own quarters here, close to him, and you will answer only to me. Grace's lips parted in surprise. Caretaker? She repeated. Yes, Alexander said. You'll raise him, teach him, guide him, and protect him, because there will come a time when the world will want things from him. Money, power, influence. And when that time comes, I want him to remember kindness first. Grace felt her chest tighten. It wasn't just relief. It was something deeper. It was knowing she would be there for his first steps, his first words, his first everything. There is one condition, Alexander added, his tone firm. Grace's fingers tightened around the baby. What is it? You don't keep secrets from me, he said. Not about him, not about yourself, not about anything that could harm this family. Grace nodded slowly. I can promise you that, she said, her voice steady. I've only ever wanted to protect him. Alexander studied her for a moment longer. Then, for the first time since she had met him, he gave a small, almost unnoticeable smile. Then we understand each other, he said. He stepped closer to the baby, who blinked up at him with wide eyes. Alexander reached out, and the tiny fingers wrapped around his own. For a moment, his hard expression softened completely. He glanced at Grace. We're family now, he said quietly. Grace felt the words settle deep inside her. She looked down at the child, who had no idea how much had just changed. In that moment, she silently promised again, no matter what, she would stand between him and the world. As she left the study, the rain outside began to ease. The halls of the mansion felt warmer than before. For the first time since she arrived, Grace felt like she belonged here, not as a servant, but as someone who mattered. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew this was only the beginning, because in Alexander's world, peace never lasted forever. But for now, she would hold on to this moment.